So, today I want to talk about workers' demands and safety. Workers rarely form unions or go on strike only for better wages. While an increase in pay and benefits is almost certainly a demand in nearly all instances of organized labor, it isn't the only important thing that workers organize for. With all the unions that I've covered on this channel, there is one common umbrella of demands that comes through equally, if not more important to most workers than wage increases, and that's better and safer working conditions. These come in a variety of forms that include but certainly are not limited to things like creating redundancies, increasing staff, giving workers more time off, eliminating quota systems, increasing the amount of time that a worker has to complete their job, eliminating health hazards, improved training opportunities, proper ventilation including working air conditioning and heating, clean water systems, and the allowance for bathroom breaks. Also, it is worth noting that increased pay can in fact make these jobs even safer by incentivizing an increase in hires as well as an increase in the retention of more staff with more experience. Now, under our current economic reality, these common sense demands are considered antithetical to the needs of bosses, from the manager all the way up to the CEO and shareholders. The point of a business under capitalism is to make as much money as possible, which means there's an incentive to cut as many corners as possible when it comes to safety. After all, the bottom line is all that matters for these companies and their shareholders. Naturally, this is at odds with the workers' goals of trying to do their job safely and effectively. However, what I'd like to address today is that these safer working conditions that are being fought for by organized labor are often not just for the workers. Oftentimes, they also reflect improved conditions for those who utilize services tied to these workers' industries. And in fact, organized labor often fights on behalf of the people who require these services and are not getting their needs met based on the decisions of management. What do I mean? Well, let's review a few examples here today. First up, we have nurses trying to protect their patients. So, as an example, we have the Minnesota nurses who recently went on strike. The nurses were demanding for a role in staffing plans, changes to shift scheduling, practices, and higher wages. "I can't give my patients the care they deserve," said the vice president of the Minnesota Nurses Association, and a nurse at Essentia Health in Duluth. "Call lights go unanswered. Patients should only be waiting for a few seconds or minutes if they've soiled themselves or their oxygen came unplugged, or they need to go to the bathroom. But that can take 10 minutes or more. Those are things that can't wait." So these nurses, while organizing, are thinking about their patients primarily, even above their own needs. They need more staff. They need more people coming in and being able to do the job effectively. And they don't have enough people who have been retained because the wages are not high enough, because the conditions are not good enough. And so then they can't provide care for their patients. Now, when we look at the way that the National Nurses United talks about the event of a strike, even they go to the full extent of going above and beyond for their patients by giving a 10-day notice in advance to the hospital that they work at. 10-day notice. The nurses give the hospital written notice 10 days in advance of their intent to strike as required by law. This is to give the hospital time to stop admitting new patients and begin the process of transferring patients who can be safely moved. Meanwhile, a patient protection task force is put in place where a task force of RNs meet to help make the process of patients transfer and hospital phase down go as smoothly as possible. Before the strike begins, the task force determines which patients may be safely transferred each day. And they provide an emergency care nurse. The Patient Protection Task Force makes a professional nursing assessment of each situation where emergency assistance is required and requested after the strike begins, and will assign a nurse to stabilize the patient if necessary. So even when they go on strike, the nurses go above and beyond to look out for their patients. giving a warning before their strikes, and still being willing to step in to help a few patients in critical care if necessary while on strike. And while some of this is enforced by law, the fact that they abide by that and that they put that as a priority within their own scheduled demands is an important factor, especially as any time that a caretaker tends to go on strike, they're often blamed for leaving behind the people that they have in their care. And they don't. They care for them first, and that's part of why they're going on strike. We need to understand the importance here that nurses, as usual, are caregivers that give above and beyond and go the extra step in ways that companies just don't provide. In addition to needing more staff, a lot of nurses also didn't get proper PPE and protection during the course of the pandemic. There's no reason that proper medical equipment and a proper amount of nurses isn't something that these companies can't provide. So next up, I want to go back and review the teachers' demands in the recent Columbus strike. Meanwhile, we have here the Columbus Education Association. When they went on strike, they were talking about things like providing smaller class sizes so that students were able to actually be taught in an environment where they could get the proper amount of attention. They wanted full-time art, music, and PE teachers at the elementary level so that students could get a full amount of development, and functional heating and air conditioning in classrooms so that, students didn't have to deal with potentially getting heat stroke in the middle of summer, and potentially freezing in the middle of winter, as well as adequate planning time for teachers to be able to provide the best lessons as possible, and a cap on the number of class periods during the school day so that teachers don't burn out and can provide for their students. The thing is, all of these demands are for students just as much as they are, if not more so than they are for teachers. We also have that many teachers are forced to buy their own classroom equipment, and that in a lot of locations, breaks are completely ignored, and that when teachers have prep periods, they're often asked to do other work. Teachers are expected to work in their off time all the time, including at home after their work hours. Meanwhile, ventilation in many buildings is non-existent in certain cities and parts of the country. Proper PPE has not been available during the entire course of the pandemic, and in some schools, there are contaminants in the water, even if they are not contaminants in the rest of the water supply of the city or area that the school's in. Yet teachers fight to try the best way they can to care for and educate their students in these very terrible working conditions, and often fight for these better conditions for their students. And finally today, I'd like to take a look at an example of a Petco store whose workers recently tried to form a union to protect pets. Now we have here that Petco had actually raised their prices on grooming at least 4 times since a certain worker had started there. But every time they raise the price of grooming, they also make it harder for the groomers to actually make money. That's because the groomers get paid through commissions based on the dollar amounts of sales that they bring in, a figure that rises along with pay increases. So this worker had said that the store raised the prices of their grooming services further in response to rising inflation, which again, anytime we see the word inflation, we should understand that that's a form of price gouging by the company because they are always charging rates higher than the current inflation rate. And yet the workers haven't seen the extra benefits. None of the money's been going into their pocket. So part of this has been that they are demanding more pay, right? But there's another factor involved. Because of the way that the company's been price gouging and all this, the workers are not getting enough jobs, which means that there are a lot of pets that are not getting the grooming care that they need because the prices have become so exorbitantly high. Meanwhile, Petco workers also wanted a greater say in addressing workplace issues. What sparked the desire to unionize for this one worker was mostly concern about not only worker safety, but the animals in our store. As a pet company, I feel like we should be holding really high standards for care. And I feel personally that maybe we aren't reaching the standards that we should be. And that's why, the idea of unionizing came about. So we can have a voice at the table to make a difference, maybe for workers and the pets, especially in the grooming salon. So the issue of grooming in a store like Petco is oftentimes that there's both a lack of training to take care of certain animals, especially ones that are not commonly found in people's homes. Cats and dogs might be easier to take care of, but if you have certain pets that are maybe not commonly found in the home, sometimes their care and what they require isn't exactly known ahead of time. And so workers can often, doing the best of their knowledge and the best of their ability, actually harm these animals by not properly cleaning a tank, or not properly following a feeding schedule, or not for even forgetting to turn a lamp off. These small things that people should be trained for ahead of time can make a huge difference in the survival of animals. And then there are often caps on times that one can spend with a specific animal, especially when it comes to grooming, to maximize the amount of groomings in a day so that corporations can make as many sales as possible and thus maximize their profits. This has led to a number of unfortunate situations where pets, both at Petco and other companies in a similar field, have actually harmed animals, where they needed a little bit more care and were somewhat neglected. And that's not even counting the amount of times where, because of these time quotas where they have to crunch, they can often end up in situations where a pet that needed more care and more grooming may not have gotten the full extent of what they needed. Now, in all of these cases, we see it quite clear that these workers are not the only ones that are being considered in their demands. When it comes to nurses, they're thinking about their patients. When it comes to teachers, they're thinking about their students. And when it comes to Petco employees, they're thinking about the pets and the animals that are in their facility that need their care and time and attention. It is the needs of communities and people who utilize these services that benefit just as much, if not more so, from the way that workers want to see businesses run. If workers had the ability to control how these businesses ran, we would see a much different outcome than the way that businesses often are run when companies are trying to seek maximum profit. Workers do want to be compensated well for their work, and rightfully so. However, they're not just motivated by the quantity of profit like companies are, but they're actually motivated by the quality of work, of what is required to do the job, to make sure that they perform it in a safe and effective manner. It makes one wonder if these workers' reasonable demands for safety are, given that they're often at odds with the owner class's needs to generate profit, if a different model where authoritarian bosses are eliminated would not produce better outcomes not just for workers, but for society and communities as a whole. Perhaps a model where worker cooperatives or some similar form where the workers control the means of production had formed, where these battles didn't have to be fought every 3 to 4 years, and the workers could run the companies in the way that they need to provide the best outcomes for themselves and their communities, we would see much better results. This is something that we need to continue to push for and fight for, because it benefits everyone, except for those at the very top of society, who will lose their maximum profits and gains, but everyone else will gain safer, better conditions for themselves, for their needs in a hospital, for their needs in a school, and for the pets they love and care about dearly. So with that said, if you've enjoyed what you've watched here today, consider liking the video, subscribing, and leaving a comment, as well as joining my Discord, where we have political conversations like these. If you're in a financial place to do so, and only if you're in a financial place to do so, please do consider supporting me on Patreon, especially as political content like this can often be demonetized on YouTube. The links for everything that I mentioned are in the description down below, and with that said, my name is Anarchist Tara. Thank you so much for watching.